Now, I am very aware that diagrams and charts would probably be very helpful. And I say to my shame, I haven't got any tonight. I just haven't really had time to do any. But I'm going to try to make something available over the next few weeks that will try to help you put this second half of the book of Daniel into its historical context and see what it has to say for us today. So bear with me. That's why I say it's probably helpful to have a pen and paper or pencil to write things down this evening. The world situation at the moment seems quite tense, doesn't it, if you listen to the news? I don't think I remember a time when things have felt quite as tense as they do now. I think maybe the Cold War in the 60s. I'm just about old enough to remember that. Andy isn't, but just about old enough to remember that. But what we're facing today, it seems like something that we've never really faced before. We've got Israel and Gaza, which is an ongoing running sore, if you like. We've got Ukraine with Russia that nobody seems to be able to do anything about. And now we've got an invasion of Venezuela by the Americans, which seems an odd thing. And now, can you believe this situation about Greenland? I'm absolutely astonished with what's going on in my lifetime. And I can't deny, I find it all just a little bit scary. I don't want there to be another war. I'm too old to fight in a war now, but my kids aren't and my grandchildren won't be. I certainly don't want that to happen. And my prayer is that it won't happen in my lifetime or theirs. But it's not just world politics, is it? National politics are like they've not really been before in my lifetime. Well, they must be, because according to recent polls, our present Prime Minister is the most unpopular Prime Minister in British history at the moment. That's interesting, isn't it? Make of that what you will. I'm making no political statements here. And then on the opposition that should be holding him to account, they're all jumping ship and going off to join Reform. And there's a real chance, brothers and sisters, that the next Prime Minister of this country will be Nigel Farage. Can you believe it? Who'd have thought that that would be the case? These are scary times indeed. We need to be reminded in times like this, don't we, that kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall. Kingdoms come and kingdoms go. But when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't necessarily feel that way. Because often the kingdoms may last longer than your lifetime. Think about Daniel. He was taken as a young man from his homeland, from Israel, Jerusalem, taken off into exile, and he lived in exile for the rest of his life, 70 years. He never saw his home again, and as far as he was concerned, for him, the permanent situation was one of exile and dishonor and all those things that go with it. He needed to be reminded that kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall. Though he didn't see it, we may not see it, it is a fact of history. And it is a fact that is carefully controlled by the one who oversees the whole of history, as we shall see. In chapter 7 of Daniel, last week, we saw just that God is in control of history. Yes, it's going to be bad. There's going to be turmoil. There's going to be empire after empire. Creatures from the sea arose in Daniel chapter 7, a lion, a bear, a leopard, and then one of unimaginable horror. Each creature more terrifying than the last. But in the end, it was God who won, because God came in judgment and called all those kingdoms to account. If you'd lived in any one of those kingdoms, you wouldn't have seen that. You wouldn't have seen what the future held. All you'd have seen is what is around you. The glorious thing for us and the amazing privilege that we have is that we have a God who sees it all, who's in charge of it all. And we can look to him And we can say, God, whatever I see now, I know that you're in control. I know the battle is won. I know the future is secure. Now, that is a good context for us to approach Daniel chapter 8. Because in Daniel chapter 8, we read of another vision that this wonderful godly man had. This time, his vision is, this time the focus is on 3 great kingdoms that are to come. We read that Daniel was in Susa. Verse 2, I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. Now here's where a map would have been helpful, for which I apologize. Susa was 200 miles east of Babylon. That's a long way east, right in the far east of the empire. It was the capital of the Persian Empire, and that's where Daniel was. Babylon, who had conquered Israel in 586 BC, had now fallen to the Medes and the Persians. That happened in 539 BC. Remember, the dates go backwards when we're BC. So 586, Jerusalem conquered. 539, Babylon conquered by the Medes and the Persians. And now Cyrus was in charge. And if you remember, when we got to the end of the first part of the book of Daniel, we saw that it was Cyrus who sent God's people back to Israel, but not before Daniel had died. Just after he died, God's people were sent home. Daniel believed that would happen by faith, but he never saw it. Now, before we look at this vision, I need to take a small excursus, and if we don't do this, we'll not be able to understand what's going on. And we need to look at the repeated phrase in verses 17 and 18, which is, what's happened here? Turn it the right way up. 17 and 18, which is this: Understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end. And then verse 18, Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. Now, unless we have some understanding of what the time of the end means, we'll be completely misled on the understanding of this vision. What does it mean? Makes a massive difference to our understanding. Some have suggested that the time of the end is the end of history, when Jesus comes again. We saw that probably at the end of Daniel 7, when God comes in judgment, when world history is wound up. In that case, some see the little horn that Daniel mentions here as the final Antichrist. It's mentioned in a number of places throughout the Bible. And we see that Antichrist is so terrible that he can only be thwarted by God himself. And it certainly looks like, when you read Daniel chapter 8, that could be the case. But I think that is unlikely. And I think it's unlikely because of the interpretation that we're told really does fit this chapter, which the angel tells to Daniel. And we'll get on to that. So what does it mean? Does it mean the end of the exile? That was certainly the end of a period of time that was a massive, massive thing in the history of Israel. The exile to Babylon, after which they returned home. Is that the end of time? For which Daniel had faithfully waited? For which he had certainly prayed daily that was going to happen? Is that the end of time? Well, I don't think so, because if that's the end of time, these prophecies don't fit, because they seem to go beyond that time. What about then if the end of time means the end of this chapter of history that's in focus in the book of Daniel? Now, there is precedent for that in the Bible. In the drama of creation and redemption, there is one great junction in the drama, one great event, which of course is the coming of Christ, the birth of the church. In Acts chapter 2, verse 17, Peter says this: "In the last days it shall be, God declares, that I'll pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your young men shall see visions, your old men shall dream dreams." In the last days, or at the end of time. And Peter clearly is talking about Pentecost. He links that with Pentecost. He calls that the last days. And then in Hebrews, do you remember how the book of Hebrews begins? Long ago, many times, in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son. It seems most likely to me that when the angel says these are for the last days, the end of time, it's this break in history that they're referring to. And as we look at these prophecies, we'll see in a moment, it naturally fits until the time when Christ comes. We'll get back to that in a moment. That's the excursus done. Now back to the vision. And the first thing Daniel sees is a ram. Verse 3. "I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns. Both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great." This is one powerful ram, isn't it? Charging north and south and west. Now, we don't need to guess what this refers to, because the angel, when he tells Daniel about his vision, tells us exactly what this is about. In chapter 18, in verse 18 rather, we read this. "When he'd spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand up. He said, 'Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of this indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia.'" Phew, we don't need to guess. We don't need to guess what this ram is. This is the Medo-Persian Empire. This is the empire that is in charge while Daniel is having this vision. And it's a hugely powerful empire, charging all over the world, north and south, west, taking Israel and the countries on the west of Babylon and Media and Persia. Persia, it's worth reminding, is modern day Iran, and we see a lot going on in Iran at the moment as well, don't we? So this is a powerful kingdom. It's a powerful kingdom. He did as he pleased, and he became great, said this ram. We're meant to think at that point that this ram is probably pretty much invulnerable. He's that powerful. He's able to do whatever he wants. But then he's defeated by a goat. Verse 5. "As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath." So it's an angry goat with a big horn. Horn means power. And he ran at the ram and he defeated him. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and he struck the ram and broke his two horns. This is a powerful kingdom, the ram, but not powerful enough to stand against the goat. The ram had no power, we read, to stand before him. But the goat cast him down to the ground and trampled on him as though it was nothing. He defeated the ram. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. And the goat became exceedingly great. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken. So this goat defeated this empire that was almost insurmountable, but this was even greater, this goat. And he trampled the ram, the empire of the ram, underfoot. Now, we're not left wondering with this one either what that means, because the angel tells us. This is always very helpful when we have something like this that we think, not quite sure what that means. If we're told, it takes all the guesswork out. Verse 21, the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. So, who's the king of Greece? Who was his first king? Alexander the Great, wasn't he? I don't know how good your history is. Mine wasn't that great on this period of time until I followed it. But the great king of Greece was Alexander the Great. We know him as Alexander the Great now. So this is the Greek Empire under the greatest military tactician that has ever been in history. I discovered that this week. Nobody's in any doubt. The empire that Alexander conquered was absolutely vast. From Greece all the way to India. It was enormous. He just took in empires as though that they had no opposition. He just conquered them as he went, as easy as anything. He conquered his empire in just a few years. And reportedly, when he got right to the far east end of his empire, and he looked around and he couldn't see any other empires to conquer, he wept because he didn't have anything else to do. That's how great, how powerful he was. But he was a man. He was a human being. And he died in 323 BC. Do you know how old he was when he died? 32. 32. And he conquered this enormous empire like no other empire in history. But the Greek Empire didn't end when he died. The Greek Empire held sway for almost 200 years, 185 years or thereabouts. There was never another leader like Alexander, though. It was him, the first king of Greece, the ram, the horn on the goat, or rather the horn of the goat, that was able to conquer that enormous empire. Now let's just pause for a moment here and remember that Daniel is way back in the Medes and the Persians empire. Daniel is now looking 200 years into the future. This is 200 years after Daniel. And we have details of what is going to come about. Now, the Greek Empire remained united, but it came to be ruled by 4 kingdoms. And we read that about this goat, don't we? That the horn is broken, Alexander the Great dies, and 4 empires result. And it's the leader of one of those 4 empires that Daniel focuses on next. And that leader is the little horn. And it is this leader who becomes the kind of focus of this vision. He's the one that this entire vision is leading up to. He is the main man, the main character. He is the one who threatened God's people more than any other leader had done before. Arguably, even more than Nebuchadnezzar when he conquered Jerusalem. This leader was even worse than that. Not only did this leader challenge God's people, this leader challenged God himself. Not only because of his name. Do you know who this leader was? His name was Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, I'm sure you've heard of him. If you haven't, just remember his name. Antiochus IV. Epiphanes was a title, and it means a vision of God. Here he was, this very powerful man. He was in charge until the Romans arrived in 164 BC to conquer the Greek Empire. But we don't get there in this vision here. Antiochus Epiphanes had a very, very high opinion of himself. Verse 9. Out of one of them, that is out of one of the four horns, came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land, that is Israel. So his kingdom is a south and east and west to Israel. It grew great, even to the host of heaven. That's how arrogant he was. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as the princes of the host. He made himself equal to God. He turned himself into a god. He had a very high opinion of himself, and he wasn't afraid to challenge God's people and to challenge God himself. He was ruthless. Where previous rulers had let the Jews get on with it in their own country, Antiochus Epiphanes said no. He began a pogrom against the Jews. He desecrated the temple in terrible ways. He made Jewish observance illegal. And I'll read you something about that in a moment. He was a terrible, terrible leader for the Jewish history. Now, we can read about Antiochus Epiphanes in the Apocrypha. Now, if you don't know what the Apocrypha is, I have a copy of it here. This is books that are not the Bible, but they are books that are kind of from the intertestamental period. The Church of England, the Protestant Church, doesn't accept these as scripture. So this is not, when I read this is not scripture. But the 39 articles tell us that they're useful books, and they do contain useful information. There are 4 books of the Maccabees in the Apocrypha. And they're named after a man called Judas Maccabeus, who eventually defeated Antiochus Epiphanes. But don't worry about that too much at the moment. Let me read to you from the very beginning of the first book of Maccabees, because it tells us about Antiochus Epiphanes. And it tells us so much more clearly and so much better than I could ever say. I'll just read a few verses for you. He advanced to the ends of the earth and plundered many nations. When the earth became quiet before him, he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. He gathered a very strong army and ruled over countries, nations, and princes, and they became tributary to him. After this, he fell sick and perceived that he was dying, so he summoned his most honored officers who had been brought up with him from youth, and divided the kingdom among them while he was still alive. Sorry, this is Alexander. And after Alexander had reigned 12 years, he died. So that's Alexander appointing Antiochus. From them came forth a sinful root, Antiochus Epiphanes. Here we are. Son of a king, Antiochus. He had been a hostage in Rome. He began to reign in the throne in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. So here he is. Let me find you some of the things he did. After subduing Egypt, Antiochus returned in the 143rd year. He went up against Israel. Here's the key bit. He came to Jerusalem with a strong force. He arrogantly entered the sanctuary, that is the temple. He took the golden altar, the lampstand for the light, and all its utensils. He took also the table for the bread of the presence, the cups for drink offerings, the bowls, the golden censers, the curtain, the crowns, and the golden decoration on the front of the temple. He stripped it all off. He took the silver and the gold and the costly vessels. He took also the hidden treasures that he found. Such arrogance to go into God's temple and desecrate it in the way he did. We read on. Then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. So Antiochus is now saying, you cannot be Jewish and whatever else you are. We are a new nation. We're all one. We're all to be the same. We're going to have one culture. And he is going to enforce it by military force. That all should give up their particular customs. All the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. Many, even from Israel, gladly adopted his religion. They sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. Awful things. Even some Jewish people gave in to Antiochus. But he banned. Now on the 15th day of Kislev in 150th year, they erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar of the burnt offering. Antiochus Epiphanes is said to have put a pig's head on the altar in the temple. Probably the worst thing anybody could have done. Well, definitely the worst thing anybody could have done. Such sacrilege, such arrogant sacrilege. It was a terrible, terrible time to be Jewish. Some of the things that he did, let me find this one, okay. According to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised. Anybody who had their children circumcised, they put to death the women. But it didn't stop there. And their families and those who circumcised them. And I hope you've got a strong stomach this evening, because they hung the infants from their mothers' necks. Isn't that just horrific? Horrific. That is this little horn that's talked about in Daniel chapter 8. I won't read any more of that, but you can read it for yourself if you wish to. No wonder that God's people at that point were saying, how long? How long, God, can you let this go on? Verse 13, I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? How long is this going to go on? It's a cry, a plea to God for mercy against an horrific situation. But God is in control. And God knows exactly when this abomination will end. Verse 14, he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary should be restored to its rightful state. Now, different commentators work out exactly how that works. I don't think it matters too much, just to say that God knew exactly the time. And in fact, in history, there was a Jewish leader called Judas Maccabeus, which some of you will have heard of, quite well known. He restored the temple back and got rid of Antiochus Epiphanes. And the hymn, Thine Be the Glory, is a hymn about, the tune is about Judas Maccabeus. Obviously, we put great Christian words to it, but the tune is from Handel's oratorio, Judas Maccabeus, and it's a praise for him, saving Jerusalem. Now, the next thing to remember about this, one important thing here as well, is this. Daniel was writing hundreds of years before, but not only that, when Daniel was writing, there was no temple because it had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel looked forward to a day when the temple would be restored. There's a little bit of perverse encouragement in here, because clearly the temple had been restored by the time Antiochus Epiphanes came along, only to be desecrated again. It was restored again after that, after Judas Maccabeus, only to be desecrated again by the Romans in AD 70. And we'll come to that in a moment. The key thing here is this: God knows exactly what's happening in history. Whatever Daniel is facing, God knows exactly, to the moment, to the second, what's going to happen and when. 164 BC, the Greek Empire defeated, and in came the Romans. The temple rededicated, temple worship resumed. Even though Rome was no friend of Israel, they weren't going to do to Israel yet what the Greeks had done. You might find it interesting to know that the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, the festival of lights, is a celebration of the restoration of the temple after Antiochus Epiphanes. When the temple was restored, they had a massive festival with lots of lamps burning, and the lights burned apparently for 8 days without stopping. And so Hanukkah has been celebrated ever since, the Festival of Lights. That's what that is. A great festival. So what are we to make of all this? There's lots more in this passage, but my time has almost gone. Just to say, read it for yourself and see what you make of it. But the points there are very clear. That God knows history from beginning to the end. That whatever it seems like to us, God is still in control. But there's one other small thing that it's worth pointing out. Some of you, if you're sharp, will have recognized the phrase of the abomination of desolation, Daniel chapter 8, which Antiochus placed in the temple. You'll recognize it because Jesus referred to it. Do you remember that? In Matthew chapter 24, when his disciples ask him about what's going to happen, Jesus tells them, look out for the signs of the end of the age. And he says this: so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, you might very well turn to me and say, well, there you are, Mark, you were completely wrong, because it's not about Antiochus, it's about something in the end. I think I'm still right, and I'll tell you why. Because Jesus is referring to this, pointing his disciples back to Daniel. Daniel is told that Antiochus was going to do this terrible thing in the temple. We know from history, just a few years after the death of Jesus, 40 years after Jesus' death, AD 70, Titus, the Emperor Titus, desecrated the temple and did terrible things in the temple. Some people say that is the abomination of desolation which Jesus was speaking about. So when you see the Romans march on Rome in AD 70, get out, because it's not a place to be. Some say that's what Jesus is saying. And I think he is. I think Daniel's talking about one event. Jesus is talking about another event and saying it's going to be like that one. And when we read in the book of Revelation about antichrists and abominations happening, what we're meant to read is there will be many. There will be many attacks on God's people. There will be horrific things happening in the history of the world. Terrible things will happen. Awful things will happen. Those who follow God will be persecuted. There's no question. It's going to be tough for many people. Jesus tells us that. But Jesus also tells us that the victory has been won. However hard it is for God's people, they are not going to be defeated. We are not going to be defeated. because the victory has been won. The birth, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus is the turning point in history. That is when the victory was won. Satan, the devil, was defeated on the cross of Christ. And we can rejoice in that. So there's a message here, yes, not just for Daniel in the century in which he was living. There's a real message here for us too. And the take home is this. Living in this world is never easy for God's people. It never is. We may never see God's name honoured by our nation. We may never see that. But God is not mocked. He has history in his hand. The victory has been won through Christ. When he comes in judgment, he'll take us to be with him forever. And all the suffering of this world will become a distant memory and an irrelevance as we spend the whole of eternity worshipping our Saviour. What a great thing to look forward to, isn't it? Let's bow our heads to pray.